We are starting Camillus in Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Cut off about 10 minutes, so it's going to be shorter than I thought. Well, I mean, we're going to have a few programs. Among the many remarkable things that are related of Furius Camillus, it seems singular and strange above all that he who continually was in the highest commands and obtained the greatest successes was 5 times chosen dictator, triumphed 4 times, and was styled a second founder of Rome, yet never was so much as once consul, the reason for which was the state and temper of the commonwealth at that time. For the people being at dissension with the state, with the Senate, refused to return consuls, but in their stead elected other magistrates, called military tribunes, who acted indeed with full consular power, but were thought to exercise a less obnoxious amount of authority because it was divided among a larger number. For to have the management of affairs entrusted to the hands of 6 persons rather than 2 was of some satisfaction to the opponents of oligarchy. Wouldn't really do much of anything nowadays, right? I live in oligarchy, by the way. This was the condition of the times when Camillus was in the height of his actions and glory, and although the government in the meantime had often proceeded to the consular elections, yet he could never persuade himself to be consul against the inclination of the people. In all his other administrations, which were many and various, he so behaved himself that when alone in authority he exercised his power as in common, but the honor of all actions redounded entirely to himself, even when in joint commission with others. The reason of the former was his moderation in command, of the latter his great judgment and wisdom, which gave him without controversy the first place. The house of the Furii was not at that time of any considerable distinction. He by his own acts first raised himself to honor, serving under Postumius Tubertus, dictator, in the great battle against the Aquians and Volscians. For, riding out from the rest of the army and in the charge receiving a wound in his thigh, he, for all that did not quit the fight, but let the dart drag in the wound, and engaging with the bravest of the enemy, put them to flight, for which action, among other rewards bestowed on him, he was created censor, an office in those days of great repute and authority. During his censorship, one very good act of his is recorded, that whereas the wars had made many widows, he obliged such as had no wives, some by fair persuasion, others by threatening to set fines on their heads, to take them in marriage, another necessary one, and causing orphans to be rated, who before were exempted from taxes, the frequent wars requiring more than ordinary expenses to maintain them. What, however, pressed them most was the siege of Veii. Some call this people Veientani. This was the head city of Tuscany, not inferior to Rome, either in number of arms or multitude of soldiers, insomuch that, presuming on her wealth and luxury, and priding herself upon her refinement and sumptuousness, she engaged in many honorable contests with the Romans. for glory and empire, but now they abandoned their former ambitions, hopes, having been weakened by such great defeats, so that, having fortified themselves with high and strong walls, and furnished the city with all sorts of weapons, offensive and defensive, as likewise with corn and all manner of provisions, they cheerfully endured a siege which, though tedious to them, was no less troublesome and distressing to the besiegers, for the Romans, having never been accustomed to stay away from home, except in summer, and for no great length of time, and constantly to winter at home, were then first compelled by the tribunes to build forts in the enemy's country, and raising strong works about their camp to join winter and summer together. And now, the 7th year of the war drawing to an end, the commanders began to be suspected as too slow and remiss in driving on the siege, insomuch that they were discharged and others chosen for the war, among whom was Camillus, then second time tribune. But at present he had no hand in the siege, the duties that fell by lot to him being to make war upon the Phaliscians and Capanates, who, taking advantage of the Romans being occupied on all hands, had carried ravages into their country, and, through all the Tuscan war, given them much annoyance, but were now reduced by Camillus, and, with a great loss, shut up within their walls. And now, in the very heat of the war, a strange phenomenon in the Alban Lake, which, in the absence of any known cause and explanation by natural reasons, seemed as great a prodigy as the most incredible that are reported, occasioned great alarm. It was the beginning of the autumn, and the summer now ending had, to all observation, been neither rainy nor much troubled with southern winds, and many of the lakes, brooks, and springs of all sorts with which Italy abounds, some were wholly dried up, others drew very little water with them. All the rivers, as is usual in summer, ran in a very low and hollow channel, but the Alban Lake, that is fed by no other waters but its own, and is on all sides encircled with fruitful mountains, without any cause, unless it were divine, began visibly to rise and swell, increasing to the feet of the mountains, and by degrees reaching the level of the very tops of them, and all this without any waves or agitation. At first it was the wonder of shepherds and herdsmen, but when the earth, which, like a great dam, held up the lake from falling into the lower grounds, through the quantity and weight of water, was broken down, and in a violent stream it ran through the plowed fields and plantations to discharge itself in the sea. It not only struck terror into the Romans, but was thought by all the inhabitants of Italy to portend some extraordinary event. But the greatest talk of it was in the camp that besieged Veii, so that the town itself also the occurrence became known. As in long sieges, it commonly happens that parties on both sides meet often and converse with one another, so it chanced that a Roman had gained much confidence and familiarity with one of the besieged, a man versed in ancient prophecies, and of repute for more than ordinary skill in divination. Now, one of the things that we should probably, going back earlier in this program, at least they were more or less honest about their oligarchy. Having a group of 6 people that publicly make the decisions. we act like our ruling families, the main ones and the other ones, and some other billionaires to the side and stuff like this. We act like they somehow aren't the ones making the decision, even though they, the House and the Senate, almost all politicians of the major parties, the minor parties. Oh, just vote Green Party or Libertarian. They're bought off too. Come on. But at least they knew back then. The Romans, observing him to be overjoyed at the story of the lake, and to mock at the siege, told him that this was not the only prodigy that of late had happened to the Romans, others more wonderful yet than this had befallen them, which he was willing to communicate to him, that he might the better provide for his private interests in these public distempers.